They said I wouldn't make it. They said I wouldn't be here today. They said I never amount to anything. So I'm glad to say that I'm on my way, and I'm growing more and more each day. There were many who started out with me, but now they're gone astray. But I'm still holding on. I'm still holding on. Lord, I am still holding on to. Our Bible reading will be found in the book of Matthew, chapter 13, verses 31 through 33. Please stand for the reading. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it is grown, it's the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thank you.
I love the Lord. He heard my cry.
I like to tag this text with the sermonic title, Too Big to Fail. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, too big to fail. The truth of the matter is that this sermonic title comes from a movie that talks about the failure of Wall Street and Main Street during the great crisis that happened some years ago. And the movie depicted how the bank and the realtors and the housing industries thought that they were so big that nothing could happen to them to cause their demise or their destruction. And in the end, we know what happened to Sallie Mae and Freddie Mac and all of them, that their whole premise was built on a lie. And on the end result was a huge collapse of the financial markets, not only in America, but in the world. And as I thought about that sermonic title, I thought about my own time in the military, about the times I felt so inferior. I felt that I was afraid because I had to go and do something that I knew I could not do. The military had trained me to jump out of airplanes. They had trained me to be all that you can be. And despite all that training, despite them telling me you too big to fail, I still had fear in my heart. I had the fear of what might happen if I jumped out of the airplane and my chute didn't open up. The fear that would happen if the wind started blowing me across the drop zone, the fear of what would happen once I hit the ground. Would I hit it and break my legs? Would I hit it and break my back? Will I survive? Will I survive this fall? And can I tell you something right now? Can I tell you something right now? That Franklin Roosevelt said it this way, that there is nothing to fear but fear itself. And many of us are afraid to live our lives because we are living in a constant state of panic and in a constant state of fear. We're afraid of getting up in the morning. We're afraid of going outside, that somebody's going to hit us across the head and steal something. Some of y'all sitting in these chairs right now thinking about it, somebody going to break in my house. You are living in a constant state of fear, afraid to go back to school and get your education, afraid to start your job, afraid to start your own business, afraid to go to the next destination that God has called you to go, afraid about what your children are going to do, afraid if they're going to graduate from high school, afraid that once you get too old, if you'll be able to really retire, and if your children are going to come back and see about you, afraid that the doctors have given you a bad prognosis saying that you ain't going to live, afraid is the cancer going to come back, afraid am I going to lose these 20 pounds that I've been working on for the last 3 years. You are living in a constant state of fear. And the truth of the matter is that many of us are unable to go to our next place and our next destination because we've been hanging around too many chickens. Look at your neighbor and say, you've been hanging around too many chickens. Don't you know that eagles don't take flight lessons from chickens? Yes, some of us are trying to learn how to fly, but we've been watching chickens so long until the only thing we know how to do is peck at the seeds on the ground when God has already destined and purposed you to be up in the air. You belong to be the CEO of the next company. You belong to be the owner of your own business, but because of fear, because you've been listening to some naysayers, folk who can't even get their own business straight, folk who already been in bankruptcy, folk who already been divorced 5 times, folk who ain't never got out of school, folk who can't even walk down the street without fear that they're going to run into somebody that they've already done wrong. Because you've been listening to folk who have been great striders but never finished anything, you're living your life in fear. Look at your neighbor and say, stop living in fear. And here as we look at this text, Jesus is really dealing with some elementary questions because he's talking about the kingdom of heaven. And as he's talking about the kingdom of heaven, you got to understand that those Jews, those Hebrews who had been living under Roman domination believed that Jesus' purpose for coming on the earth was to set them free. So they saw Jesus as a conquering warrior who was going to come and set them free, get their business. Oh, y'all know what I'm talking about. The Jews thought Jesus was all about. They saw Jesus as being a conquering king. And so when he came riding on a lowly donkey, they said, this don't look like something that a king would ride on. When Jesus came rolling through in the crib, when saying, give, sell everything that you have and give it all to the poor, this didn't sound like a conquering king, because Jesus was saying, now that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And you got to understand, when you start talking about kingdom business, we ain't talking about pews, we ain't talking about stained glass windows, we ain't talking about the Hammond organ on piano. That's all part of what helps us create the kingdom. But when we really start talking about kingdom building, we're talking about having the presence of God in our life. I mean, taking God with you to work. Whenever God shows up, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And the problem is that the reason why some of us are going through so much hell, chaos, and confusion on our job and in our church, because we have ran God out of our lives. You don't come to Bible class, you won't come to Sunday school, you won't volunteer. I don't like the way it's organized. I don't like the way they spend their money. No, you've got to get to the place where you've got to recreate heaven where hell is. Look at your neighbor and say, you got to learn how to put heaven in hell's place. Is there anybody here who's ready to put heaven in hell's place? Right now, hell is in your home, but you got a right to speak to the hell that's in your home and put heaven in its place. And so our text is going to talk about that today. It talks about, in this text, a mustard seed. And when we look at this text, y'all mind me taking my time, do you? When we look at this text, when you talk about a mustard seed is so small until you can barely see it. But the reality of a mustard seed is that once you plant it, it grows as big as a tree. Yeah. So Jesus here, Jesus is the sower. The mustard seed represents heaven. It represents the purpose that God has placed in you already. And then Daniel is talking about leavened bread. When we talk about leavened bread, you're talking about bread that is used to, you're talking about a yeast that is put into bread to help it to rise. Now let me tell you what's so ironic about Jesus talking about leavened bread, because the Jews and the Hebrews were forbidden to put any leaven in the bread. That's why when you come down to communion and you have flat wafers, the flat wafers are to represent a bread that has no yeast in it. Because if you know anything about yeast, you know that yeast is, and so they were commanded, don't put any yeast in your bread. But here, Jesus is telling a story about yeast that needs to be in the bread. It seems like he's contradicting himself. That's why I paused there when he started talking about the yeast, that the kingdom of heaven is like yeast. Oh, y'all missed it all. One is that the one reason why you're too big to fail is because there's victory in your story. Look at your neighbor and say, there's victory in your story. Look at your neighbor and say, there's victory in my story. You got to understand that this parable is a story. Jesus is telling a story. A parable is a spiritual, an earthly story that gives a spiritual message. And can I come and tell somebody up in here that some of y'all are walking parables? You have a story to tell. This morning we sang it, blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine of my hair of salvation, purchased of God, born of his spirit, washed in his blood. Anybody been washed in the blood of the Lord? Yeah, I know you came up in here this morning with your nice suit on, with your shoes on. I know you're looking fine as homemade wine, but the truth of the matter is that people knew what you had to go through to get through the day. Some of them would not believe you even made it. And the thing about your story is that your story has a beginning, your story has a middle, and your story has an end. And I don't know where you are in your story. Right now, you're still writing the chapters of your story. But your story don't have to end like it began. You started out in death, but you don't have to end in death. One thing about the story is that all of us come in our own story with some mess. The first thing you need to know about the story is that God is representing the story by using a mustard seed. And the thing about mustard seeds is that anything that is a seed must die before new growth comes. You cannot take, when you bury a seed, it represents something that is dying, so that new life can spring forth. And when you look at your story, you can be like Ray Charles. I just see Ray Charles. Ray Charles had a story to tell. He could tell his story. We saw it in a movie. His story was about the time he was born. His brother died. His mother left him all alone. She died. And he had to make ends meet by himself. And people tried to keep him handicapped, said he would never be anything because he was blind. But I come to tell you, they only saw his beginning. But if you look at the end, he became one of the greatest musicians that ever lived. Is there anybody that got some failures in your story? You ain't always been good. You ain't always been the dog's bow wow. You've got some stories to tell. And the reason why God has left you here to tell your story so that somebody can read your book. Yep, chapter 1, I was addicted to drugs. Chapter 2, I used to hang out in the corner. Chapter 3, I came to church one day. I heard the voice of Jesus. Chapter 4, I gave my life to Christ. Chapter 5, I started singing in the choir. Chapter 6, I started being an usher. Chapter 7, don't know where I'm going from here, but I got my story. And as we look at this text, what is really going on is Jesus is saying, I want to tell you a story, and the story is about heaven. And if you're going to really deal with heaven, imagination. Your best move of God came out of the midst of failure. I thank God for the times I failed miserably. As I played the piano, people used to tell me to get off the piano. I used to go to the piano, they begged I wouldn't play. But look at me now, everywhere I go, somebody want me to play the piano. Failure is a part of my life. But not only that victory in your story. I'm going to marry this. There's victory in your seed. Look at your neighbor and say, there's victory in your seed. The text says, see, what happened, you see, is that the sower, he didn't sow a plant that was already grown, but he sowed a plant that was dead and needed to be deposited in the ground. I come to tell somebody that number one, the seed is the gospel. That's what it represents. But on another level, when you look at the mustard seed, the truth of the matter is nobody wants mustard seed in their garden, because mustard seed produces weeds. And here's Jesus talking about that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. I come to tell somebody that the victory is in the seed, because God, no matter how dirty and no matter how ragged it is, look, God has placed the purpose in you so that your old seed can die, new seed can come forth and bring up new life. You know, in Japan right now, they have created a square watermelon. I ain't lying, y'all see it, because some folk wouldn't believe me if I told you that you can go buy a square watermelon. You can go to Japan, and some of them, even in America, bear square watermelon. Now, can I tell y'all something? The watermelon seed is good, but it's what we do with the seed after it produces, it grows to fruition. What they do in Japan is take the watermelon while it's still in its infancy and put it in a square-like box, and they then try to shape it to be the perfect watermelon. But the problem with it is this, that while it is growing, because it is not in its natural habitat, it is not allowed to grow to its fullness. So it looks good on the outside, but when you cut it open, it's not even fully developed and ripe. And I come to tell somebody, don't try to make folk fit your image, but allow them to be who God has created them to be. Some folk have never grown to the place where God has called them to be, because we have tried to mold them in our image instead of allowing God to do what God wanted to do with him. And I come to tell you that it doesn't matter if you're a square or if you're a rectangle, the seed is good, but it's what you do with the seed. And is a good church. It was born to be a good church. It's been a good church for a long time. But whenever we stop being the church, the seed is still good, but we lessen the power that God has. We could have been a lot further off if we'll only listen to the power of God. And I come to tell somebody, you don't know what God has for you, but only God knows the end. And because human mind says what you can't do, God looks at you and says what you can do. Look at somebody and say, yes, I can. Yeah, there's victory. I'm almost done, y'all. Victory in the seed. But last, you're too big to fail, because there's victory in your change. Look at somebody that says victory in your change. Yet the text says that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed and leavened bread. Now, here's what I want y'all to know. Y'all mind me talking. I ain't hooping right now. I just want to talk to y'all. Don't despise small beginnings. The mustard seed is small, but it undergoes a change. And change doesn't happen overnight. The leavened bread, when you start making bread, you only need just a little bit of leaven, a little bit of yeast, just a little, to make the bread rise. And I come by to tell somebody here today, you don't need a lot of money to do what God has called you to do. You don't need a lot of education to be what God has called you to be. The only thing you need to do is just be a little mustard seed. Because as you go through the process, you ever seen a caterpillar? A caterpillar, it doesn't look like it's going to be much of anything. But it goes through what we call a metamorphosis. It changes, and as it changes from being an insect that crawls on its belly to being a beautiful butterfly that can grace the world with all of its colorful beauty. And I come to tell some of y'all that some of y'all right now are caterpillars. They see you, they don't see what God has for you. But if you just hold on for a little while, a change is going to come. Can I get a witness here? You don't have to have a whole lot of leaven, but just a little leaven in the bread will make it rise. I come by here to tell somebody that if our world is going to change, God is not looking for you to go and be T.D. Jakes. He's not looking for you to be Rodney Hudson, but he's looking for you to be the you that God has created you to be. So if the only thing you can do is say patter, 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 I dare to say patter, patter, patter in the name of Jesus. If the only thing you can do is wave your hand, I'll wave my hand for Jesus. Is there anybody here who don't mind saying what a wonderful change has come into my life since Jesus? Says Jesus. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, since Jesus has come into my life, oh, what joy floods my soul since Jesus came into my life. I looked at my hand looked new since Jesus came into my life. I looked at my feet and baby too since Jesus came into my life. Is there anybody here who don't mind saying neighbor, I don't know about you, but I don't ever have Jesus. I don't ever have Jesus than all the rubies in the world. I don't ever have Jesus than my fine house in the county. I don't ever have Jesus. If I could say nothing, I'll raise my hand. But not only that, let me tell you, your victory will give you some enormous results. Look at your neighbor and say, victory is going to be big. I don't know about you, But one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite shows is The Biggest Loser. I don't know why. Maybe it is. It's my favorite because I've got a lot of weight to lose. But it's something about looking at The Biggest Loser. When I see folk who were 300 pounds and now they're 140 pounds, I get joy. I come by to tell somebody, when you think of what Jesus is saying in this text, what you is that if you don't look back 2,000 years, he died on the cross. 2,000 years, folk could not worship him as King of Kings. But 2,000 years later, the seed has grown. You got a church on Baker Street. You got another church, New Bethlehem, down the street on Baker Street. You got another church on the corner. You got churches everywhere. The seed is still going. And you might be saying, Reverend, how can you say the seed is growing? Because every Sunday, come to church, I look in your face. I see that you might be going through something, but you're still here. Is there anybody here that can say, despite everything I've been through, I'm still here? Good God Almighty, they talked about me, but I'm still here. God be everything but a child of God, but I'm still here. Look at me like I'm crazy. I'm here to give him the glory. I'm here to give him the praise. I'm here to say thank you. If I had up all the toes, I couldn't say thank you enough. Thank you for waking me up this morning. Thank you for starting me on my way. Thank you for giving me food to eat. Yeah! To throw in the towel. You might be ready to give on up. But I come to tell you, I'm a witness that he will keep you. I want to sit down, y'all, but the Holy Ghost is on me. I want to sit down, but I can't stop talking. Oh, good God Almighty. I'm a witness. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, won't he do it? Look at you and say, neighbor, won't he do it? Won't he do it, y'all? Won't he do it? Won't he do it? What will he do? He picked me up, turned me around. Won't he do it? Won't he do it? Won't he, 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 won't he do it? I'm through. I'm blue. I'm blue. I'm blue. I'm blue. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. His eyes are on the sparrow. I'm not perfect. I've done wrong in my life. But his eyes are on the sparrow. And I know I can't help myself, y'all. But when I don't know what to say, I just start moaning to myself. I gotta moan sometimes because I don't know what to say. God has been good. God has been good. Yeah! I'm sorry. Y'all gotta forgive me. But if you only knew what I had to go through to get to here, We had to know about the many nights I had to cry myself to sleep at night because folk who don't know me don't like me for no reason at all. If you only knew the times when I asked the Lord, how am I going to make it past all of this? And can I tell you that God has shown up each and every time? I'm a witness that it's too big. Knowing Jesus, you cannot fail. Maybe there's someone here. I'm too big to fail, y'all. I'm too big to fail because the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And maybe there's somebody here. Somebody right here who's facing failure. I invite you to come and give Jesus your heart. The doors of the church are open. Is there one? We offer Christ. Come on, my brother. We offer Christ to you. Oh, my sister. He will give you bread and life. He will give you bread.